Hi, I'm Michael Waltrip, and welcome to the Legends of Stock Car Racing. Today, we're going to head down to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and catch up with legendary car builder Bud Moore. What a career he's had. He's fielded cars for many of the greats, Weatherly, Isaac, Baker, and Allison, just to name a few. And the memories, well, we'll hear about those when Johnny Hayes visits with Bud Moore right after this.
Bud Moore, one of the legends in motorsports. You've been here since the beginning of time. I think you were probably here when they first cranked it the first time. How did you get involved in motorsports originally?
Well, Johnny, it's sort of a long story. You know, I was born and raised here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I got out of the Army in 1945, and a friend of mine named Joe Eubanks, we went in the used car business. There's a guy named Massey Atkins that lives up here at Landrum. He had opened up a dirt racetrack, and somebody said he sold illegal liquor and stuff. I don't even really know about that, but anyway, he had a dirt racetrack he would open up, and we started running. So he came down, and we had a couple of 39 Fords on the lot, and he had one he wanted to trade, which he had a race car that they had been running, and wanted to trade it for one of these other 39 Fords we got. So we traded for this car, you know, and I told Joe, I said, you know, they're going to run a race here pretty soon up here at the Ruffton County Fairgrounds. I said, why don't we take this car up there and run it? So I went out to warm up in that thing. They had quite a bit of mud on the racetrack, pretty wet, and had her all sideways and everything else. And finally, first thing I know, I got down in one of the corners, and right through the fence I went. All the boards are flying and all this. So we got it back out of there and pulled the fenders off, and I got in it, tried it again. So I run the first heat race with it, and I fooled around, was running about 4th or 5th, and I got tapped a little bit, and through the fence I went again. Finally, Joe said, well, let me try it. So we got in he drove it in the Constellation race, and he won the Constellation race with it. And that started his career as a race driver. And so from then on, I said, you drive it, and I'll start building them and working on them.
Now, did you make money off of race cars when you were racing, or were you doing it for fun?
Well, we started out mostly doing it for fun. But when you run 3 races a week, and back then, you know, if you took in $250 on a weekend, that was like probably taking in $10,000 now, you know.
Right.
I think when we had an engine, what we called it was a modified flathead Ford engine with 3 3/8 bore and a 4 1/4 inch crank in it, and all the heads running on methanol alky. We had about $500 in that engine. Is about all we had. Where today it takes 31 to 32,000 in an engine. 1950, when they built Darlington, we had 75 cars starting. They lined them up like they were at Indianapolis, 3 abreast, 25, 3 abreast. We started the race, and you couldn't run very long, and you had to change tires because they'd be wore out. I changed so many tires with a 4-way lug wrench that day till just gave completely out. And they had a faucet in the pits where water run. Every time we stopped changing tires, I'd go sit down in that water and run water over them and try to cool off because it had to be about 100 degrees.
And the lug wrench was just like the old style, right? Big 4. Pit stops were not in 18 seconds.
No, you done well to do one in 2 minutes. And I remember the Cadillac that Red Byron was driving, they used 75 tires.
Good Lord.
And we gave out of tires, and we went out in the infield, and we jacked up. A guy said, well, just get my tires. We took the tires off his Oldsmobile and put them on, and that's how we finished the race.
Now, those are real racers. You had so many drivers over the years drive for you. Just a little bit in review, tell us about some of the people that drove for you and the kind of experience it was working with them.
Well, you know, I had Buck Baker, I had Speedy Thompson, Joe Eubanks. I mean, you just about name them all. At one time or another, they drove a race car for me. All the race drivers back then were all real talented drivers and this stuff. Joe Wedley was a heck of a good race driver. You know, him and Curtis Turner were real good friends and this and that. And we won the championship with Wedley in 1962 and 63. We won quite a few races in them 3 years he drove for me.
One of my favorite shots of Buck Baker's prior to one of the big events, right before his gentlemen start your engines, he's sitting in the front seat of the car and somebody's handed him a bologna sandwich in or something.
That's the type person Baker was when he sat down in that race car. I think he knew that he could drive that race car. He could about make that car do what he wanted it to do. And a lot of the other drivers that they just didn't have the talent that Buck Baker had. And I think that's why little of that talent rubbed off on his son, Buddy, because, you know, Buddy won a lot of races and he drove the car on a similar situation the way Baker did.
You know, and what tickled me, there is a contrast, though, and as I watched that shot of Buck sitting there relaxed, eating a bologna sandwich, as we say, gentlemen, start your engines. You remember Buddy? He would put his uniform on at 8 o'clock in the morning, start smoking cigarettes, and pacing. He would go, boom, boom. You'd say, hey, buddy, how you doing? And he'd stop, and he'd look at you real strong, and he'd puff 2 times and say, good, man, good, good. But he was pumped.
I don't know what it was about it, but he just didn't like getting there at 9 o'clock in the morning. The race didn't start till 1. I mean, it just sort of didn't suit him that way. When he came out to the racetrack, he was ready to crawl in that race car and let's get it done. But that waiting around, it sort of had a little something other on it. I don't know what it is.
And I'd always harass him just as much as I could to make it that much more miserable for him, of course. He'd be throwing things at me. Y'all were so good with Buddy on the super speedways. Y'all had so much success with him. He would hold it down, wouldn't he? I think at Daytona and Talladega, you could probably throw him in there today and he'd still hold it down for
Well, Buddy, you know, we had a lot of success at Talladega and we had a lot of success at Daytona and all the major speedways. But Talladega was a very, very good racetrack for Buddy, and he liked Talladega, and he'll tell you that he run that car from pit stop to pit stop and never pick his foot. And he'll tell you right today, and I said, Buddy, you mean to tell me? He said, I've run it, just run it from pit stop to pit stop.
Never lift.
And never lift his foot.
There it is, one more lap to go, and the crowd is delirious because now David Pearson is beginning to close. The Silver Fox is famous for last lap finishes. Now, can he do it? With $25,000 on the win spot, both cars are wound to the limit. Tack needles way over the red line. 2 4-wheeled missiles are screaming down the back chute, and David is closing. Now into turn 4, there have been 52 lead changes thus far. David Pearson is trying desperately to make it 53. There goes the slingshot out of the dogleg, but he can't do it. Buddy Baker wins the 5th annual Winston 500. David Pearson has to settle for 2nd. Dick Brooks takes 3rd, and Darrell Waltrip finishes 4th. Buddy Baker picks up his pit crew and heads for victory lane. Owner and crew chief Bud Moore tips his hat to a champion. David Pearson has won this race 3 times. Today, Buddy Baker beat the master of Talladega in a flat-out...
The whole art was just like Buddy back then, you know. He just run it wide open. And Some of the other guys, you know, their chassis setup would be a little bit different or something. If he had to crack the throttle, then he was history. And that's the same way today, you know, like I say, with a stricter plate motor, a lot of the drivers have found out that you run to keep the throttle on the floor. And if you run up a little too fast on the car in front of you, you touch the brake. Don't pick that throttle up. You touch the brake to sort of slow it just a little bit so you don't lose that momentum.
Bud Moore is a true American hero. He was a machine gunner and a part of the D-Day invasion in 1944. When he landed on Utah Beach, he was wounded, but when he recovered, he captured a small German headquarters, taking 19 prisoners. When he returned to South Carolina, he had 2 Bronze Stars and 5 Purple Hearts.
I remember one time we was running Charlotte with Buddy Baker. It was about 1975, 76. And we made the last pit stop, and we went back out, and David was leading the race, and Buddy was running second. So Buddy passed Pearson after we run about 4 or 5 laps, and started stretching on him a little bit, you know. So I called Buddy and I told him, I said, you better slow down a little bit and save them tires a little bit and all this. I says, Pearson just sitting back there watching, and I said, he's keeping his tires cool, and I said, you better just sort of take it easy. Oh, I got him beat, I ain't worried about him. So we finally got maybe half a straightaway ahead of him, you know, and got down to about 3 or 4 laps ago, you know. I called him on the radio. I said, you better pick it up. I said, he's coming. Who? I said, Pearson. I said, he's coming. Well, I ain't worried. I said, I'm telling you, he's coming. You better pick the pace up. So he tried to pick the pace up, but his tires are so hot and gone, he couldn't pick the pace up. So the harder he tried, a little bit slower he got. And all of a sudden, you know, about 2 laps ago, Pearson done stuck a cigarette in his mouth, pushed in the lighter and lit that cigarette. When he got down there coming off the corner, he blowed smoke at me. No, he said, I didn't mind him out running, but said the rascal lit a cigarette and blowed smoke at me.
The ultimate insult. Another thing that that hit me real hard that we were talking earlier, you were talking about you and Buddy Baker at Bristol one time, and how you can overdrive a racetrack and get in trouble versus if you'll slow down and take care of it. Why don't you share that story with us?
Well, we were at Bristol, and we were running a pretty good race. I think we was running in maybe the top 5, and, you know, with 500 laps back then, Bristol was a long time. So we'd run about maybe 200 laps, and Buddy called me, and he said, you know, he says, my neck's killing me. He said, I'm going to have a relief. And I said, well, hang in there a little bit longer. So we made a pit stop, you know, and put a cold towel on him and this stuff, you know, and he went back out. So we done proceeded to get about 2 or 3 laps down. And finally, you know, he said, I'm going to have a relief. I said, well, Buddy, just slow down, take it easy. And I said, I'll find somebody. I said, you ain't got about 130 laps to go. And I said, just take it easy. So he starts slowing down, and the first thing you know, he's picked up about a second. And first thing I know, we lapped the field. So now we're only 2 laps down. And we kept running, you know, and I kept telling him, slow down, take it easy, and I kept talking to him. He says, man, my neck, I said, you gonna be all right? I said, we ain't got but about another 75, 80 laps to run. And we kept on. Finally, we run 3rd in the race, well as I remember, and we was only 1 lap down. But by him slowing down and not driving the car so hard, we run a whole lot faster than a lot of the other cars that was running on the racetrack. When the race was over, you know, and he said, you know what I want to know? That was the longest 130 laps I ever run. I said, no, but you run 270.
Didn't you have the same situation with Dale Earnhardt in one of the races?
We did this with Dale Earnhardt. We were leading the race in Darlington in 1983. And we were way out front, you know, and I called Dale, and I said, Dale, take it easy a little bit now. I said, we got this race won now, we just need to slow down a little bit. So he started backing off a little bit, you know, and all of a sudden I'm looking at my watch, and he's done picked up another 2/10. I called him out. I said, hey, I said, slow down, not pick up. He said, I've slowed down. I said, well, slow down a little bit more. But really what he had done when he did slow down and start taking a little bit more easy, he picked up a couple, 3 tenths.
When Bobby Allison drove for you, Bobby Allison, as we talked earlier, he loved to drive race cars. He was good on short tracks, road courses, speedways. A real, just a gifted race car driver. How was it when you were working with Bobby?
Bobby was a very, very talented race driver. I think Bobby Allison could drive anything, any type car. In fact, I believe if Bobby would have went to Indianapolis, and I think within a couple of years of running there, he could have run awful good at Indianapolis. That's the type talent driver and what kind of feel Bobby had for a race car. Like I say, I'd say this, that Bobby, if he could have run 5 days a week, he would have run 5 days a week. That's how much he loved to sit down behind that steering wheel and mash that gas pedal and go out there and race. And I don't know of any type race car that modified or sportsman or a Winston Cup car or what, that if he sat down there and made a couple of laps in, he could come in and tell you just how good that car was or what. So I can name you one time, you know, Bobby had his own airplane, and he's one of the first drivers, you know, that flew to the different races and stuff by living in Birmingham. We was running the race in Richmond. And the weather, he got weathered in. And we were at Richmond, so he called up there and got me on the phone. And he says, I'm waiting on the weather to break a little bit here because we can't get out. And he said, how about doing one thing? I said, what's that? He said, let Neil Bonnet go out and run my car a lap or two, make sure the brakes is all right and everything's good, and I'm gonna try to make it. The qualifying was just rolling off. And we had done qualified 2 cars. And here Bobby was standing down at the, you know, had to cross the guardrail in, and this was to get into the racetrack. So he come on in, run over the truck, got his uniform on me, come running back up to the car, and crawled in, sat down, got his helmet all hooked up, you know, and he says, did Neil drive the car? I said, yeah, he drove it, said everything's fine, the brakes are good and everything else. And can you believe we sat on the pole?
You're kidding.
He took it right out there and set it on the pole. And
only in America, right?
Then another man that I know could have done that. He just went right out, come around and set that car on the pole. And when he come in, the other guys, they said, they can't believe this.
Bud has had 63 wins and 922 starts in Winston Cup racing, but in 1969 through 71, he elected not to compete in that series, instead focusing his efforts on the Grand Touring Division and the Trans-Am Series.
And we were running the Trans-Am Series for Ford Motor Company. We run the Mercury Cougars. We had Parnelli, and we had Ed Leslie and Dan Gurney and Peter Refs, and all drove them Cougars, you know, on the Trans-Am circuit. And then Ford decided, well, they didn't want to run the Cougars because it was a luxury type car, and again, the Mustang. So they wouldn't let us run them. That's when we started the Grand American circuit with NASCAR in 1968. So we run the Cougars and started. I helped pioneer running the Cougars and the Mustangs and the Camaros in NASCAR in 1968. So Tiny Lund drove the Cougars for us in 68. And Donnie Allison was driving for Ross Huggins. They had a Mustang. And
Is that Huggins' tire now?
Right. So they ran a Mustang and the different ones. We had about probably, every race we started, they had probably 30 cars. And we won about every race we ran in, and we won the championship. And
on the 249th lap, Lund fires his car under the white flag. One more lap, and he can count the money. Here he is out of the 4th turn and down the front chute for the checkered flag, the winner of the Sand Hill 250. Savage finishes 2nd in the team car. Bud Moore makes it a clean sweep for the Cougars by taking 3rd, with Buck Baker's Camaro 4th, and Greg takes the 5th spot. After a total of 15 lead changes, Tiny Lund ends up in victory lane with the trophy, the big slice of the purse, and the Queen. He thought this was a great idea.
I remember the first time I ever met Tiny Lund. We was running a race in 1955 in Memphis, Tennessee. And Tiny had come down and had a Chevrolet he was running. We was running a 55 or 56 Ford.
And he was from Iowa.
Iowa, yeah. So something happened, and Tiny turned over somehow, and it was so dusty out there you couldn't see. And Tiny turned over the car, and it throwed him out. And he's laying in the middle of the racetrack, and my car run over him.
Ran over him?
We straddled him. And driver Joe said, I don't know what it was, but something rolled up all underneath the car.
Oh, my Lord.
And we found out later it was Tiny, but it never hurt him. Back then, you know, the cars wasn't like they are today, you know, this low on the ground. They was up high, you know, because we run dirt, and dirt you had to have a car way up off the ground because you jump in them holes and stuff, so we straddled him. And that's the first time I ever met Tiny Lund. That was 1955. So the sport has really grown. It's come a long way, and I know a lot of people has asked me this day and time, says, well, you take Fireball Roberts or Joe Wedley or any of the guys that drove race cars back in the 60s and in the early 70s, could they drive one of the cars today? Those guys had just as much talent as Gordon, Earnhardt, or any of the other drivers we have running today. They were just as much talented as they were. To get in one of those strictly stock automobiles that was jumping around all over the racetrack, sideways and all this, and run it for 500 miles, and get out of that car and still could walk. I mean, he was really in good physical condition, and he had a heart to go do a job like this, and I still think that any of the drivers we had back then could get in one of these cars, and it'd be an awful good show.
Well, that's it for this week. I want to thank Bud Moore for joining us, and I hope you'll be back too when we have another edition of The Legends of Stock Car Racing.
Well, you know, Bill France Sr. was a very, very intelligent man, and first time I ever remember seeing Mr. France was running a race over at the Greenville-Pickens Speedway. France was running a 39 Ford. And here he stands about 6'6", and I said to myself, I said, now how in the world is he going to get inside that little 39 Ford he's running there and get folded all up? But when they got through introducing the drivers and they crawled in and run the race, he folded up enough to get in that car. And he run pretty good. Well, as I remember, he run third in the feature that day. His biggest dream was to have a major speedway, could run 200 miles an hour on it.
He had that dream that long ago.
He had that dream that long ago. He wanted to have a speedway where he could run 200 miles an hour, and so that's why Daytona was built the way it was.